We had our ITS staff that were helping us out in terms of deploying last-minute communication upgrades or getting additional cameras out in the field as we needed to. Our emergency operations staff was activated to communicate and work with GEMA, as they are the lead agency from an emergency operations perspective from the state. Our TMC floor, our IT group, and last but not least, our HERO. This was not just obviously arterial group, but also interstate management as well. HERO had a lesser role than you might expect, kind of based on what I was talking about earlier, where this is not a traditional event. Folks were in town already. They had been in town for 10 days, and they were bouncing around between Midtown, Buckhead, downtown, right? So they were trying to get around the arterial network. It wasn't so much a heavy influx of 70,000 people trying to use I-75 or I-85 to get to one location. So they were out there activated, and we had pre-positioned and staged them to get them to what we thought might be trouble spots, but honestly their load was pretty light during this event. It really was on the surface streets in the arterial network where we had the brunt of the issues. And then getting into interagency coordination. So it wasn't just GDOT. You can see our Super Bowl ops team, where a lot of the GDOT folks were, and how our emergency operations was kind of out to the side working with GEMA and everybody. But we brought in Georgia State Patrol to help us. Atlanta Police, again, getting back to, hey, stay out of the road, help enforce what the signals are doing. The City of Atlanta Department of Public Works. But then you can see all of these groups reported up to emergency management. This was a tier 1 security event, whatever, I can't remember the exact term for what it was called, which meant that every security protocol that you would do for the highest level event was in place. There were helicopters that were flying over downtown Atlanta with radioactive detection, trying to detect, somebody was trying to do something insidious, so to speak. They were going the entire 10 days. They kept me up at night when I was working, when I was at home. GEMA and the Super Bowl operations, it wasn't just transportation. Within Super Bowl, it was the logistics of the event itself. It was the communications of the event itself. It was getting the teams in and out. It was getting media in and out. It was standing up these other events. So we were just one component of the overall Super Bowl operation. Ultimately, the Super Bowl operation had over 10,000 employees or volunteers that worked during this time period. And then again, coordinating up to the Department of Homeland Security. You could not walk into as a tier 1 event, Mercedes-Benz Stadium and the Super Bowl campus had a 300-foot radius surrounding it that was not accessible by the public unless you were fully credentialed to go to the event. So the entire downtown area, including the World Congress Center and other surface streets, were completely shut down, and they built what they called the moat, which was a 10-foot wall literally surrounding this entire area, that the only way to get in was through credentialing locations, that you had to go through a whole number of x-rays and all types of security checks, which were crazy to see. But security obviously was very tight. And so you can see we were just one component of this very massive operation. It's probably kind of hard to see, and I apologize for that. This is a layout of our TMC floor and how we stood up logistically within the TMC for what we called standard operations and then emergency operations. So if everything was going as we anticipated, and we were essentially trying to do traffic management, we were in standard operations, where you can see the folks that were reporting were traffic operations folks, my office with RTOP, communications folks, state maintenance coming in from an emergency operations perspective, the district, Secret Service, which was pretty interesting. And then over here we had law enforcement. So we had APD, GSP, represented from the airport, City of Atlanta, and then SP Plus, which was the NFL's consultant for traffic management. Their traffic management was more so, how do we get 400 buses from Turner Field to the event area, because that's how they were transporting all of their volunteers, or how do we get, limos from the airport to, wherever. That's kind of the aspect they were working on. Also the private airplane issue that came up. I honestly don't know what their solution to that was. And then we had all of our screens. If any of you have been in the TMC, we've got numerous screens. Every single one of those was dedicated to one specific aspect of the operation, whether it was looking at video feeds from the cameras that were out there, looking at data coming back from our ATSPM software, looking at travel speeds from probe data, looking at our navigator system in general. They all had their distinct function and their distinct use, which was predetermined and pre-planned. And then if we needed to, we were swapping over to emergency operations, where this is when, okay, all of a sudden something has occurred, right? We're in evacuation mode, there's been some sort of attack or what have you. People were going to be coming into the TNC. We were going to be standing up our web EOC, our Emergency Operations Command. Our chief engineer was coming in, our commissioner was coming in, our director of operations were coming in, other agencies that were going to be working this event from an emergency perspective. This is what we didn't want to happen, right? This was our Be Agile plan, our plan C, plan D. But we had it fully planned out that if the switch was flipped, this is what we were going to do. All of the screens were going to change over to various different things, and we were going to operate it in a very different mode. Part of it was just moving our lead consultants that were helping us out from the traffic management side to the emergency operations side, which was literally just moving them around the corner in the room about 10 feet to their right. That doesn't seem very important, but in real time, when you're trying to communicate, you're trying to do different things, when you have a different mission, that becomes very critical, right? We wanted to make them fully available to law enforcement, to emergency operations staff, rather than just general traffic management staff, because that was going to become their primary directive. So we had surveillance. Part of what we were doing was just essentially watching what was going on to see if the data that was coming back matched what the real world conditions were. So we had all of these represent a CCTV camera within the downtown area. One of the biggest successes we had was being able to drop the firewall between Georgia DOT and the Atlanta Police Department. APD has a tremendous number of surveillance cameras that they use for law enforcement purposes that prior to this event we never had access to. Because of the Super Bowl, we were able to get those cameras into our system, and all of a sudden our eyes on the roadside more than doubled overnight, which is tremendous. So we were able to really see almost every block within the downtown area. So you kind of see how all of these systems, whether it was Navigator, City of Atlanta cameras, and then finally APD cameras, all came together to create a pretty large visual system across the downtown area. And you can just see this is Esteban, one of my staff members, using those systems. He's actually looking at one of the APD cameras in that picture, and what we were able to do, some of the visuals from those cameras. We were using those throughout the entire 10-day period. Signal operations, you can see we have the downtown core, midtown, everything already online with our signal system, running ATSPM analytics, pushing timing plans. We needed to get a few last ones up and running, so you can see with the red there some of the detour routes we had to get upgraded. So in the run up to the Super Bowl, we were deploying software, deploying communications to those locations, because the primary detour router on Northside Drive was Joseph Lowry Boulevard. So we needed to get that ready. And a lot of establishing those detour routes was fairly complicated because the entire downtown area was essentially shut down. They were not viable detours. So we were looking on the west side. And when you think about those roads, they're very narrow. The radiuses are very tight at some of those intersections. So our detour routes have to accommodate trucks. It was fairly difficult to get an appropriate detour route for this event. But we were able to do it, and we were able to get all of those roads up and running through our signal software and through communications. And then we did performance tracking. So this is, I know you guys can't really see this, but this is directly from our ATSPM software. What on the left, top left, what you're looking at is in the run-up to the Super Bowl, how we were improving in terms of looking at when the Falcons played the Cowboys. That was a very heavily attended event. And then we wanted to see how we managed that versus how we managed the college football championship, to see where our ingress and egress plans getting better in terms of tweaking those over time. And the way we were looking at that was from a travel time reliability perspective, an egress timeline perspective, so you can kind of see some of those bars indicate when volumes were high and when they dropped off, which it allowed us to approximate how long ingress took or how long egress took. And then we were looking at arrivals on red and arrivals on green. How many vehicles are actually getting to a signal and we're able to proceed through on green, or were they being stopped? And trying to minimize arrivals on red, maximize arrivals on green across the network. So this is some of the data that we were looking at. We were tracking this event by event in the lead up to the Super Bowl and making tweaks and adjustments over time. Say, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Let's make a change here. Let's make a change there. See what happens. See what's different. We were using probe data, obviously not very dense, but this is just travel speeds that are occurring in real time. So this is information that's coming through a company called Heath, where they're using cell phone probe data to determine how fast traffic is moving. So we were watching this during the college football championship and then the lead up to the Super Bowl. And then you can see how we use that probe data again for Super Bowl 53. So this is just US 19 northbound at one specific time. You can see the average, or the current speed, the average speed, what the travel time is, and then how that tracked over time. And again, that's all cell phone information that was coming into us real time. And we were able to essentially overlay that with our signal system to understand, okay, how are we managing traffic? Is what we're doing working? Do we need to make adjustments from here? We take all of this ATSPM data, this very granular data, and push it to a dashboard that's been created to give us a regional perspective of how are we doing. So on the top, you can see speeds. This was day by day speed. So you can see, okay, in the lead up to the event, how are we doing? How are we tracking historically? And then obviously as you get to the game, okay, a little bit worse, that kind of thing. So we could see how we were doing over time. Moving down, again, I'm sorry, it's hard to see. We got travel time index, so reliability. So you can see this jump. This was not Super Bowl Sunday, by the way. That was the day before, which was the worst day because we had a lot of unticketed events that were happening. Throughput is the one below that, and then arrivals on green, and what percentage of folks are hitting a traffic signal on green. So we are looking at this across the entire region, you know, and looking at it holistically to say, how are we doing? Let's make some changes if we need to. This is just focusing on a different route, so I'll skip through that. And then we wanted to package all of this information into daily debriefs. Wanted to get it into the hands of our executive staff so they knew what was going on in real time and how are we doing. And we wanted to condense it down into just very few significant indicators of what the network was doing. So you're talking about overall speed, overall reliability, overall throughput, and how that compared to historical data and what the percent difference was. How many events are we anticipating today versus tomorrow, right? How are various regions doing, Buckhead? How are the interstates doing? And then what types of calls are we getting into our 501 system? All right, so we wanted to get this into our hands of executive staff, but also into the hands of our communications folks, because they can use this to tell our story. Say, here's what's going on, and here's what GDOT is doing about it. So we can sort of control the story during this 10-day event and help the media and the public anticipate what might happen tomorrow. Right? If we had 15 events today and we've got 25 tomorrow, you know, they can kind of start telling that story that, hey, it might have been a little worse today. Tomorrow it's probably going to be a little worse still. You know, and then we can kind of frame the conversation during the event. We also wanted to highlight, you know, successes for what we had during one particular day, or weaknesses that we had during one particular day, how we were going to mitigate that moving forward throughout the duration of the event. And then working with the media. So on the top left, that's at the TMC, just across the hall from our emergency operations command room. That's our communications staff. So they were just across the hall. We would package together our debriefs, walk over there, sit down with them and say, here's what happened yesterday. Here's what we're anticipating happen today. Let's craft a story. Let's push it out through our Twitter feeds, our Facebook feeds. Let's do some press releases, that type of thing. And then you can see on the top right, that is communications staff with us in the EOC. So they were monitoring the event with us so that they could push real-time alerts out or establish real-time communication with the public as things were happening. We had an extremely cool event that occurred where we invited WSB and the AJC into the TMC to have them watch us run preemption through the signal system to get the Patriots from downtown, from their hotel, to Georgia Tech for one of their practices. And And we did this with with the signal software and with the communications that we established, where there wasn't some device in their bus that was telling the signal system to redirect to a given phase on the signal. We were just using the signal software to push adjustments in real time as the bus was moving down the corridor, so that they always got greens, right? The media was able to watch it in real time, and they timed it. Took the Patriots, they were at the Hyatt Regency downtown, going to Georgia Tech. It took them 3 minutes and 47 seconds to make that trip. They hit greens the entire way, didn't hit any conflicting traffic, and they were able to just proceed through, and the cops didn't even have to help them. It was very cool. After that, the reporter from WSB got in her car, drove to the Hyatt Regency, right? And her second story of the day was her sitting in her car 20 minutes later trying to get to Georgia Tech, which was pretty amazing, right? So I was like, we try to give them a little, extra courtesy for these teams. But the neatest thing was that we were using technology to do that, right? We were using our established platforms that we had built over time to do preemption and things like that as it happened in real time. The bottom photos are just some of my staff utilizing technology. So you can see this is the big TMC screen in the background here, which had some of the RIDS data up there and various camera feeds that were going on. And we essentially lived in that room for 10 days. We did go home every so often. So lessons learned from this event, you got to build relationships in advance. And I think RTOP did a lot of that for us, really over a 20-year time period, working with local partners, working with Atlanta Police and the City of Atlanta. If those relationships hadn't been there and we hadn't gotten everything onto a common platform, we would not have been successful. You got to have clear expectations in what you're going to do in advance, whether with the media, with the public, with your executive staff that you're managing this event for. You got to be clear in what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, how you're going to do it. Plan for every contingency, going back to that curveball we had in the national championship, and the potential for very significant curveballs in the Super Bowl, which we thankfully did not have. You got to plan for it all. You got to tell your story. This is something we learned, again, going back to the 85 bridge collapse, why that event turned into a success for us rather than a very catastrophic failure, is because we were able to tell our story as to what we were doing and why we were doing it. And we exercised those lessons learned during this event, and it worked very well. And you got to identify the need to potentially overstaff, and that goes back to the contingency. Have the folks that you know are going to work this event, but have your secondary group that are ready to come in at moment's notice just in case something were to occur. Thankfully, we did not have one of those, and overall, Super Bowl 53 traffic management worked very well. And then drive decisions with data. And going back to utilizing our signal software, our platforms, looking at our probe data, looking at our ATSBM data, use that information to make informed decisions rather than just trying to do something on the fly, because that's how you're going to be successful. That's it. What questions do you have?
First of all, thank you. I'm excited. Okay, question, please.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. How often were you pushing kind of custom timing plans to some of the corridors right around the stadium?
Depending on the day
Okay.
and what the events that were occurring during that day. So we knew that the NFL Live and the NFL Experience were happening every day, right? So we had sort of our baseline plans, and then we had, okay, the events that were occurring every day, let's have our plans for those. And then depending on what was occurring during that day, if it reached a significant enough level in terms of attendance, we would have unique plans for those, right? So on day one of the 10-day event, we knew 5 events that were occurring. On the Saturday before, we were up to 85 events that were occurring. So you can imagine it ramped up and ramped up and ramped up and ramped up. And then honestly, in Super Bowl Sunday, the number of events dropped to like 3. Right? So talk about there's Super Bowl and then there's the game. The real day was on Saturday. And we were pushing timing plans relatively frequently that day.
How did you work in the pedestrian movements and do that?
So we had implemented a few different things, and we called them either, one of the main things we did, we called it a pedestrian hold. So So we would, we would push a plan that essentially would just serve pedestrians for like 5 minutes straight, right? To try to flush pedestrians out of the area. Because they were all contained within, that immediate downtown core. And some of the corridors that got really bad, like Centennial Olympic Park, a few others where there were so many pedestrians, they were overwhelming the sidewalks and getting on the street. So we would essentially implement an entire hold for any phase serving a vehicle and just serve pedestrians. Right, so we kind of managed that in real time, where we would implement those. We'd see something was going bad, say, okay, push a ped hold at this location, and usually it was a stretch of corridor that we would do it. And we learned that we started implementing that technique as Mercedes-Benz opened up and trying to get folks from the stadium to Vine City MARTA station, right? Just trying to cross Northside Drive. This was before the pedestrian bridge opened and everything. Where we would do like a 4 or 5 minute long pedestrian hold just for pedestrians crossing Northside Drive to get over to the MARTA station. And then we would open up the road, serve vehicles for a few minutes, and then do it again. There's some really cool videos that we have of just, cars going by, and then all of a sudden everything stops, and it's just waves upon waves upon waves of people moving out. And then they clear out and we're able to serve vehicles again. So.
But it was pretty much driven by somebody looking at the.
That's right. Yep. There was staff at the TMC that were implementing those holds as they became necessary. And a lot of that was communication with law enforcement that was on the street as well, right? Because when we were telling them enforce what the signal is doing, they're there holding pedestrians saying, the signal's showing green for vehicles, I need you to stop until the signal changes. Well, they would radio us and say, look, I got 500 people here now, help me out. Because eventually they're just going to start going. And so that communication became critical. We said, okay, yeah, we can serve that. And